Alrighty, so today I got a really cool video. I'm joined here by Andrew Strauch, who has just won a PQ with Qi'Ra ECL, reached the finals in two other PQs before winning that third one. It's a crazy run, so I'm really happy to have him here to kind of do another deep dive on a deck that I have been very active in maintaining for a long time. Before we get going, though, if you haven't yet, please hit that subscribe button. It helps out the channel a lot. All right, so here we go. We got Meet Andrew. I've thrown some things here on a slide, but I want to really throw this over to you, give you an opportunity to kind of introduce yourself. Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. Well, thanks for having me, Will. And yeah, so I think I started playing Star Wars Unlimited maybe like May. I got a little late into set one. I didn't really have a lot of TCG experience. I played Magic like a very long time ago. I mostly played like video games like Teamfight Tactics, League of Legends, kind of stuff like that. So it's been a lot of fun, kind of like getting back into the swing of things, and like the Star Wars Unlimited community near us in Northern Virginia is like really great. And yeah, I just picked up the game, and I don't know, like the action, you take an action, I take an action sequence was like really, really fun. You know, everyone was very excited when the set first came out, so that was really enjoyable to kind of be around. And yeah, and then once the kind of Store Showdown started getting going, we had a group of people near us that went to a lot of them, and it was really fun to just kind of go and hang out with people and meet people and kind of learn the game. And then, yeah, like you mentioned, like the PQs got going, and it's been really fun to go to those. Yeah.
All right, that's really cool. And I was wondering if there's anything in particular that kind of led you into wanting to play more competitively in general.
Yeah, I think just the community we have like around the game, I guess, would be like number one. Like it's a lot of fun to go to these events and hang out with people and meet people, and everyone's like very supportive, kind of where we play, like in our locals, and we've got a lot of really good players in our area. So it's just like fun to compete and like talk about lines and kind of learn from other really good players. Yeah, I just kind of have enjoyed that. Like I mentioned, I didn't really have any TCG experience, so like even though I would say like I'm kind of competitive, like with games, like kind of going from like, you know, video games to like TCG competitions, like very different. So that's kind of been like a learning curve for me. But yeah, it's just been super enjoyable, and like all the judges and like the store owners and stuff like that that I've you know, encountered and worked with have been super friendly, and the events have all been really well run. So that's been really positive.
Nice. And it's my understanding you are kind of actually part of a bit of a competitive team now, right? You have some people that you specifically test with, go to a lot of tournaments with. Is there anything you want to kind of, do you have a name? Is there anything you want to shout out there?
Yeah. So we're calling ourselves Team Sekrit, and we've got a bunch of really, really good players. I know you are familiar with Sonny. Yeah. He's played against, you know, a lot of top players, and we also have Ryan Conroe, who's won 2 PQs. So Sonny won one 2 weeks ago, and then Ryan won one in set 1, and then he also won one, I want to say like a month ago in set 2.
Set 2, right? Because I don't think we had PQs in set 1, right?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, you're right. Sorry. I'm sorry. Set 2, and he's won one in set 2 and one in set 3, and then Sonny just won one in set 3. Sorry.
That's a pedigree right there.
Yeah. Oh yeah. So yeah, they're like really great guys, and we have a bunch of other people on the team as well that are like all like really smart players, like, you know, super fun to like test with, go to events with, hang out with. Like we just road trip to the West Virginia PQ, to Sonny and Ryan, two of the people on the team, and yeah, it's just been a blast.
Nice. And Sonny is actually the one that you played in the finals, right?
Yes.
In the week before in Virginia, right?
Correct. So yeah.
So he got his first on you, and then you went back next week and got yours.
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. And we're going to kind of deep dive into like your winning PQ. I think we'll probably spend some time there, but we can talk a little bit about anything of note from your 2 finalist appearances as well. Anything else before we kind of go in?
Yeah, I think so. Like in set 1, you know, like I said, I kind of got late into set 1, and I was sort of like catching up, learning the meta, all that kind of stuff. I was playing like Tarkin Red, which is not like a, you know, tier 1 deck, but it was super fun. You know, I topped a couple Store Showdowns. And then I think when set 2 started, I was like, all right, I want to like, get a better handle on the meta. And like I said, I didn't really have a lot of experience with TCGs. So I actually reached out to you for coaching, and that's actually been really helpful for me. I would say to anyone that's like watching this and doing competitive stuff, I think like number one, like having friends or people you like playing with like is really important. Going to locals and all that stuff, but coaching also really helps like kind of give you like I think like a different way of looking at things and kind of a different perspective. And So we've done like one-on-one coaching, and then you also have a new Patreon tier for kind of like deep dive, kind of like live Q&A, if that's a good way of describing it.
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah, and that's also been really cool too. So yeah, anyone that's watching this that's like, hey, you want to compete or learn the meta better or anything like that, I would definitely recommend it.
Well, I really appreciate you saying that. It means a lot, and it's incredibly awesome to see you like go from like I've known you for a few months now. I've seen like the growth, and like seeing you go and like win a PQ this quickly. Not only just win a PQ, go 3 in a row to the finals. Like not a lot of people can say that. Don't have that pedigree, and it's been like an honor working with you. I think that's incredibly awesome, and I appreciate the shout out there. And for anyone who's interested, I'm gonna leave all the links in the description to like the Patreon. You can see my coaching post there. You can see information about all like the memberships there as well. Nothing is paid unless you want it to be, so you can definitely just check all the information out for free. All right, we're gonna go into Qi'Ra now. That's kind of the main event. Okay.
Sounds good.
So this is the beginning. Why Qi'Ra? I want your elevator pitch. I want you to tell me. We're gonna break down the deck, obviously, but this is like your quick hitters. Like, why are we playing this leader?
Totally. So I guess, my frame of reference, like I mentioned in set 1, is like I had Tarkin. So I think, like like a lot of players, you play Overwhelming Barrage and Vader, and you're like, these cards are pretty sweet. So that was like the most fun kind of, stuff I had in set 1. And I was like, all right, so I kind of would like to see if I could fit that in. And I'm not really a very good aggro player, so I kind of lean more towards like mid-rangey stuff. So I know like you and a bunch of other people were on Krennic in set 1, and I just had like never really gotten around to it. But I was like, oh, that's cool. There's like some similarities, and obviously, there's a lot of differences, like better top end and all that. But I was like, let me look into that in set 2, and then kind of, Qi'Ra, when she was spoiled, I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I like kind of her like deploy, being able to like stabilize the board. So I was like, let me try her out. And I know you were really big on her like before the set even dropped. And I was like, okay, like, Krennic was good. Like this seems kind of like in that shell or whatever. So let me try that. And she was just like super fun, like taking her to locals. Like she felt like very flexible too. Like her pattern is like kind of weird, right? Like every other leader, you're like, I want to flip the leader and jam damage, and she's kind of like an event, and you don't have to deploy her right away. So it's like sort of a, I don't know, weird kind of pattern, but it's very fun and very flexible. I like that she has the early deploy. That was really cool. And the way I describe when people ask like how she plays, I would say like villainous Luke. Like I know Luke was like really good in set 1. I have some friends that play Luke, and like the shield value is like really interesting, like kind of as the game goes on. So that kind of whole package, I guess, like kind of, I've been playing her like since she came out, and like haven't really gotten on anyone else. So.
And yeah, I think that shield ability I think gets overlooked a little bit. It is quite impactful in a lot of different scenarios, especially now that we even have like another grit unit like Devastating Gunship, which absolutely loves that ability. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with like early deploy. I mean, anyone who's listened to me talk in any videos knows that like once a leader's cost gets to 6, I mostly start to tune out.
Right.
There's a few that are decent. I don't think any of them are particularly tier 0, right? Like there's a few like Cad Bane and Anakin and like Rey that like kind of squeak into like the meta, but for the most part 4 and 5 is where we're living. And and she's got that. All right, so I'm gonna go sequence now into the West Virginia recap. But before we do that, actually, I'm gonna ask you just like anything quick that you want to mention about your 2 final appearances before you went down to this West Virginia one.
Yeah, so this is actually the fourth PQ that I've done this season. The first one was at our local store, Curio, and it was like the first week of January. And I think everyone I've talked to at that event, or at least all like the people I'm very friendly with, like we all felt very rusty, like coming off the holidays, and like I hadn't really played in like I don't know, like over a month at that point. Really, like I was just kind of following PQ news and stuff like that, and I got a little bit of practice, and I was like, all right, I'm good to go, and I just did not perform very well, and I was like kind of disappointed. And so I was like, all right, let me see if I can prepare better for the next one. And the next one was at Games and Stuff in Maryland. That one was like super competitive. There were like, first of all, it was huge. I think there were like over 100 people. It's like 110 or something like that. So it was like, I think maybe the biggest one of the new set so far at that point. And there were like a lot of really, really good players there. Like I played against Chris. I forget his name. I think you know him, but he like got
Yep.
multiple like top
He's from
twos, top
BN.
fours.
Yeah.
From Boston. Okay, yeah. He was really, really good on Han Yellow. I played your buddy Alex Blandon, who's a two-time PQ winner. I played Tyler. I didn't get his last name from McClunky. He was really good. I played another really good Han player in the top cut. I forget his name. He also, I think he won a PQ or got top two or something. Anyway, a bunch of really, really, really good people. And then Ian Klein in the finals. And so like that event was just like Han all day. It was like 4 Hans, 3 Han yellow, 1 Han green. And then just like, I played another good Sabine player in top cut. So that was like just a, gauntlet of like really, really good players, really fun matches. And then the thing for me is like I mentioned earlier, like not having a lot of TCG experience, like the fatigue just like got to me by the end. Like I made a couple misplays in top cut. Still got to the finals, but game one, I just completely like blanked that he ejected the Falcon. He had one card in his hand, and I was like, okay, I need to try to stabilize the board, and just forgot about it. And I should have like vigilance to heal and got me some more time. So I punted that game. I got game 2, and then game 3 was like super close. Like it was a very, very, very fun finals and good match.
Yeah.
But still, I felt like
he's a really good player, and
yeah, he's excellent.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I left a little bit on the table there. So I was like, all right, gonna go. One more. Let's go to the Virginia Beach one next week. And we had a bunch of locals code go down. I think we had like 12 of the 15 like spots at the end of Swiss were all local player, like from Northern Virginia. So like we showed out really well, and that was a lot of fun. And played one of my teammates in top cut, really good Han player, Michael, and I got that match. And then my other teammate, actually, he was on Django. He conceded to me. And then I went to the finals. I played Sunny. That was another 3 games.
Against Han Green again.
Against Han Green again. Yeah, it's just deja vu. And that one, I lost, but I felt like I didn't make any misplays. I felt like I managed the fatigue a little better. I was just starting to slow down, and I just lost track of time, and we went to time. And, Sonny played great. I'm not taking anything away from him, but I realized I just need to kind of be a little more cognizant of like the timing and, kind of just play it like smidge faster. But I was very happy with like, how I played. And then I was like, all right, we'll do one more. So we're going to.
And now we're going to talk about this one, right?
Yeah,
and I have on the screen here the kind of the matchups, right? So.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So do you want me to just go match by match, or?
Yeah, I mean, we'll do like quick hitters on this because I think it'd be good once we're going to talk later about like matchup specific stuff. But I did want to ask you about the Boss Blue. So you lost round 1, which is it's always tough to kind of like submarine from round 1, and then you basically have to go undefeated the rest of the way. But what's even a cool note here? This is Boss Blue, and we've talked a bit about the strategy here about Boss Blue, and like I want you to tell me what happened here. Okay.
Yes. Right. So I had a lot of experience in like set 1 playing against like these harder kind of control decks, and it's like when you play this color combination or just specifically villain command, you quickly realize like how good Relentless is into like these event-based decks. Like it just feels like it's just really powerful and kind of wins the game. So the kind of discussions that you and I have had, you kind of came up with the idea of like, well, what if we just stick Relentless in the sideboard and then concede game 1 bring Relentless in, and then just kind of take the next 2 games. And even though it sounds like strange to people listening or have never heard of that, like, I've tested a lot, you've tested a lot, you and I have tested it together, and like I do feel like that is like the correct play, like in the current meta and like the configuration of the main deck and side deck and whatever. So anyway, that's what I did. So we sat down in round 1, and my opponent, pops Bosk on the table, and I was like, okay, this is gonna sound weird, but I'm conceding game 1. He was just like, he thought I was like pranking him or something, and I was like, no, this is actually what we're gonna do. And he was like, okay. And so, game 1, finish game 1, no problem. I get that one. Game 2 went on for like a long time. It was very grindy, and I just kind of got flustered a little bit. I think basically there was one turn where like I had Relentless. I got in for 8. He played some event to blanket, and then he played Fell the Dragon, so took out Relentless. He had no board. He only had like a couple cards in hand, and I had like Palp's Return and Relentless in hand, and the second Relentless obviously in the discard, so I felt like pretty good. So I just didn't think about it, and I slammed, the second Relentless in my hand, and he just goes Fell the Dragon. And I thought he had 3 resources instead of 4, so that's like my bad, because I had a unit to insulate from power. So like I didn't care if he powered the Dark-Sided, but I just didn't like math that out correctly. And like that, it ended up being like super close, but that one misplay, basically cost me the match. And I was like, obviously very disappointed, because I feel, like that's normally a great matchup. And that's, like you said, not how you want to start the day.
Well, and I'll ask you, like, yes or no, I guess. You sit against Boss Blue again, you still conceding game 1?
100%. Yeah.
Okay.
No, like when I talked to other people, they were like, oh, like my opponent was doing well. Like we were both like X1 for most of the day. And like a couple people approached me and they were like, oh, like hopefully you don't match, against the guy again. I was like, no, I want like the rematch. Like I want to, because I know I can play this like correctly. I'm not going to get put off my spot just because I made a mistake. And like, I was also like, not to make excuses, but I was like, I didn't sleep great the night before. And this is also the 3rd weekend of like jamming these PQs, and I was sick all week. So I was kind of getting over that. So I think all those factors, I just starting off like sluggishly. And then, so that was like round 1, not a great start. Round 2, I get paired against Boba Yellow, which, I feel is like a good matchup. And I just lose game 1. Not because I misplay, he just rolls over me, just curves into U-Wing and home 1, and I just lost. So that was how I started the day. Not great. And I was like, all right, just settle down. This is fine. And, won the next 2.
You did. I mean, I'm looking at the score here. You didn't lose a game after that until the finals. So
yeah. So I think at that point, it's like I was obviously like, oh my gosh, I have no margin for error or whatever. But I think I just settled down and just, didn't panic. And it was just like, I just need to play well. Like, it's fine. Like, don't worry about tiebreakers or whatever. And then I kind of, like I said, settled in, locked in.
Rolled the rest of the way. And we're going to talk about some of these matchups a little later, like Sabine and Django in particular. So we're going to skip that for now.
Sure.
But I did want to ask you, so you got into this top 8, and here's Han Green again. This is the deck that has just beat you twice in the finals, right?
Yes.
Now, a couple of days before this, I think there was a deck change, a slight tweak to the deck, right?
Yes.
That you mentioned to me did help win one of these games. So I wanted to ask, like, in general, how do you feel about this matchup? And then what do you think, like, can kind of help that might not be, like, in every Qi'Ra deck or whatnot?
Yeah. So first I wanted to shout out our teammate Ryan, that he was on the Han Green. This is not Sunny. Sunny was also in this top cut, not surprising. But this is our teammate Ryan, and this is his first PQ top cut. And he also just picked up Han Green, like, 2 days before or something. So really happy for him. Nice. But yes, about the card changes. So like, there were like 2 card changes. So going back to the PQ, the first PQ, where I played Ian in the finals, we had talked about Scanning Officer, specifically not even for Han Green, but Han Yellow, really, because it's just everywhere. And I think you and I both agree that's like probably the best deck right now, like overall spread. I mean, if you look at the results and everything, it's hard to argue with that. And after playing Scanning Officer against 3 really good Han Yellow players, it just felt underwhelming. Not even Scanning Officer, but specifically like with this deck that has a lot of interaction with the tech DJ, which we can get into later or whatever. I just didn't like think it was like super great. So we changed up those 2 sideboard slots. And then specific, at this point too, we were looking at like, are there any other options or whatever? And I think for me, there were 2 things. There was one, there was Maul. So Maul is just, I feel like, a really underrated card in general. Not that like people don't know about it, but I feel like, you talk about like Vader and other things like that, but like there's a lot of matchups. I was just like always bringing Maul in. I know you expressed something similar. So went to 1 Maul main deck, plus 1 Maul main deck out of the sideboard, and then had an extra sideboard slot. And I was like, getting just beat down by Falcon for 2 weeks in a row. And I was like kind of rewinding almost like set 1 and set 2. And I was like, all right, like, I played Sunny and other really good Han players many, many, many times. And I was like, when the format was a little slower, like set 1, like what was kind of the silver bullet or whatever. And it was like Devastator. Like that's the one card
against Hungary specifically, right? It just locks the board.
Yeah, and like because it's like you want to play, you have these specific kind of criteria in that matchup, which is like you're a little bit weak to space, right? So it's like you want some help in space, you want a Sentinel in space. Ideally, you want a unit that like when they waylay it, like you're not really sad, and you like with Avenger, for example, it's like they can like go wide, and then Avenger's not doing like exactly what you would like it to do, whereas like Devastator can like pinpoint deal with something, and then it's just sitting like its butt in space, and like it's very difficult for them to deal with.
And that did out that cheese out factor, right? Where you like play the Avenger, and then they play like Tech and Millennium Falcon from the resource row or something, and get that last 3, right?
Yeah, and slap you. And that it won like I think 3 games throughout the day, and one of them was sealed the game against Hunt Green. So yeah, it's a very good card against I think some of the mid-range hero decks, I think.
And like maybe even the Boss Green deck, which is starting to get a little more popular. The non aggro version of Boss Green, where they're just like
I ran into that last week, so and I would have definitely boarded and Devastator there too as well.
Yeah. And then you went back to back into Django, which in my opinion is like of the common popular decks that get played right now, is probably Qi'Ra's worst matchup.
The worst matchup,
like Palp Blue is probably a worse matchup for Qi'Ra, but it's not a popular deck. Of the like top tier play decks, and you took them both down. One of them in the finals is my teammate John, who you beat 2-1, who beat me twice in New York, once in the top cut. So this is not an easy feat to be able to go in and take down some powerful Djangos. We will deep dive this matchup a little more after, but I did want to just like call that out because that is impressive. Seeing you be able to like kind of go back to back, and can't imagine after beating one you were too happy to see another one. But
yeah. So for like when I think you're exactly right, and like so I was a little nervous like going against Ryan. I was like, am I going to lose to Han Green like 3 weeks ago on the top cut? And it was like even though it was only 2 games, it was still like that matchup, as you know, is like very back and forth. There's a lot of decisions. It can be kind of a grind, and it still took a while. And so your teammate John Tata, talking to him all day, and I was like, joking with him, I was like, I hope I dodge you. I don't really want to play you, your deck specifically. And as soon as I win the Han matchup, John walks up to me and goes, "Congrats, your reward is playing Django Tarkentown." And so I get matched against the other Django player in the top cut, who I talked to for a while. His name's Ben. He's super nice. He actually played a lot of Qi'Ra. So I was talking with him throughout the day. So we're like kind of very familiar with each other. We just hadn't played against each other. And that was the first game was like kind of close. The second game was razor thin, like down to the wire. And there were like 6 units on the board at one point. Like it was kind of a crazy board state specifically for that matchup. But it was really fun. And yeah, got through that and then got to John in the finals, and that was 3 games. I would say there were a couple games that we both kind of drew sort of weird hands. Like we were playing all on the ground in game 3, which is like that does not happen a lot in that matchup. But yeah, I mean, John played great. It was really close, and I just, I drew really well in game 3. So
yeah, and you need to draw well. That's a thing that needs to happen.
Yeah.
All right. So I've opened now the deck list. So this is screenshot of the 60 that you played. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to kind of ask you just a few questions, but the first one, and this is like the hot topic thing for Qi'Ra all the time, is 30 versus ECL.
Mm-hmm.
Question I get a lot. In fact, in the previous video, the one that I did that was almost like 2 hours long, I actually at that time, it was very early in this set, was kind of pushing 30 because of Django. I thought 30 had a better matchup into Django, and I still think that is accurate. But Han was basically nowhere to be seen in like the first few weeks for some reason. Once
Right.
Han kind of elevated into like the de facto number one deck, I very quickly was like, you can't not play ECL anymore. I think it's so much better into Han. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to hear, besides those two matchups, Django and Han, because I think most people agree on those two. ECL 30, go. Tell me what it is you think about the
Yeah.
rest of the way.
So I will say that so in the first PQ that I mentioned in set 3, in the first week of January, I was on the 30, the 30 base, and yeah, I think it's still good. I mean, you know, the PQ winner in France, I think in January, the first Qi'Ra player in set 3 was your exact list, and you know they won. So clearly, it's good. It felt good. I think, like I mentioned earlier, that PQ, like I was just super rusty. I did not play great. I think I could have, like, you know, gone farther with it. So I think it's still good. It's just that, like you said, I think there's a lot of matchups where you want ECL, and I would say it feels more powerful to have the ECL. There's also like the fun factor, like, you know, my favorite cards in the deck are probably like, you know, Lom Pike and Gideon Hask, and like you don't have this like really strong sequencing to kind of catch up, even if you're taking off the turn to ramp on like the 4, 5, 6 resource turn. So it can feel a bit awkward, and you can try to, like, you know, on your 6, 5, and 6, you can, you know, play like a devastating gunship, which is fine without, you know, ECL, but it can be kind of mediocre depending on the board state. And you can try to like double ramp and things like that.
Traitorous
like,
is often a card too that is
yes,
more in the
Traitorous
30
was
health. Yeah.
Traitorous was very, very good. I would say it overperformed that day, especially against Han Yellow. It was like a lot of interesting lines where like they play Falcon, I would just immediately Traitorous it, and like, you know, they'd like waylay their own Falcon, but like that's great. Like they're you know, spending all the resources to like play Falcon later, and just buys you so much time to get to your 7s, 8s, 9s, or whatever. So Traitorous performed extremely well into a lot of matchups. So I think the 30 is fine. You're kind of just playing more towards your late game. You're trying to just survive the mid game, whereas I feel like ECL, like you can sort of like take over the game a little earlier. And like Gideon Hask specifically was the biggest difference there. Was like you had outs to other things like wing leader, like you could Traitorous, like you had, you know, you didn't get blown out necessarily, but like there are games with Gideon Hask where he just wins you the game. Like there are lots of games where if he doesn't get answered immediately, like he solo just like muscles the game.
And I mean, Eddie demands an immediate answer, which just gives you a whole turn, right? Like essentially they have to spend a whole turn, and Kira's usually happy with that, right? We get to prolong, we get to get to 7, right? That's where we're.
Yeah, it's like feels like you're the aggro player for like a moment. Like you're presenting like this kind of threat, and they need to kind of deal with it, and kind of like not having those like power plays, if you want to put it that way or whatever, felt like you lack some of the explosion. And like you and I have talked about this, but when I played against Sabine players, they saw I was on 30 health, and they were like, "Oh, this is harder." And then when I switched back to ECL, they were like, "Oh, this is great, like the 5 health." But it actually feels better with ECL. Like,
so I was gonna ask. That was, you stole my question, but yes, I was gonna definitely, because that's the common point is always like 30 better versus aggro, and I've actually tried to push back on that a little bit. I do agree with you. I think ECL is better into Sabine than 30, and I've spoken with some good Sabine players who also agree with that. Primarily because you get to flip the board a turn earlier, right? But yeah, you mentioned that you felt that way. I think you mentioned like through your 3 events recently, you've been just like crushing Sabines. Like you haven't even lost to one yet.
Yeah, so I did. Ironically, the only Sabine match that I've lost was that first PQ to my teammate Ryan, who ended up winning the whole thing. And that was on 30, and it was not because of the 30. It was
Yeah.
because I misplayed, but it was fine. I think it's fine. I don't think I think it's kind of close. I don't think it's like, oh, if you don't have ECL, like you're just a total dog. But I don't know. I think like ECLing Gunship, let's say Gunship specifically, right? Like Gunship in that matchup is just really interesting because, like, let's say the A-Wing wing leader, you ECL Gunship, and oftentimes they'll trade wing leader in. But like if they don't, like you can just race them with Gunship. Lompike can line up really well into a lot of things. Obviously, there's Hask. So like, yeah, like you said, you just kind of can take over the board or like catch up in tempo. Or if it doesn't line up where you need ECL that turn, like you can do it, a couple turns later. Like it's still there to kind of like generate value for you.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you. This is just a fun question. Which of those 3 units do you think you use ECL with the most?
That's a really good question. I mean, lately I feel like Gunship probably. Okay. Because I have played, like you said, a lot of Sabine, a lot of Han. I mean, ECLing the Gunship into Falcon to take out Falcon and leaving behind like a threat
6 power
feels
threat.
feels really good. And then like they have to kind of answer you, or you can just race if they want to race you on the ground. But yeah, the Gunship is probably the most fun, I feel like, because there's just if you ECL Gunship like and it injures itself and it's got grit, like the threat of barrage off that is like just like huge. Like in the Top Cut this last week, I played against my teammate against Han. He did the Marauder line. Like I don't know if all your viewers are familiar with that, but in Han you can, resupply turn 1 and then blow up Marauder and then use Han to play Marauder and get Marauder back and ramp and then play Han immediately. Just like this, and yeah, that happened to me. I literally considered just conceding for time in that game because I was just like, I'm so far behind. And like that line is just so insanely explosive, but I was able to ECL Gunship, take out the Marauder, which was 4 damage. So now it's at 7 power. He U-winged out, I think it was modded cohort and DJ or something, or some 5 health unit. And I was able to claim barrage, take out both of those units, swing for 9. And it's like that. Yeah. Like that play is not possible without ECL, and also the action economy. So that's why it feels good.
Yeah, and I think Gunship is actually probably also the best one of these cards when you're not ECLing with it, because there are situations. For me, I'll say I think Lone Pike is the card I ECL with the most, and I speak with a lot of people. I do the coaching, like you said, and I think I do a lot of Qi'Ra stuff, obviously, but Lone Pike is something I very much had to kind of reinforce a lot, that like it's an amazing ambusher. It might be the best 4-cost ambush unit in the game. And I think the fact that it has smuggle on it has maybe tricked some people into thinking they're supposed to just put it in the resource row. And I very rarely resource a Lone Pike until after I've used ECL. That 5 resource turn, I often will keep it over Gideon, in fact, because it lets you shield it after you ambush with it and then flip Qi'Ra to immediately heal it back to full, which creates some crazy board states. And so big all-star there. And like you said, Gideon is the one that like probably is the most niche, but also has like a game scenarios where it completely overwhelms your opponent.
Right. But no, Lompike, the other line I like with Lompike is this actually happened to me in the finals against John, was I didn't ramp in game 3. And actually I boarded it, like we've discussed, like Gideon and Lompike, that's probably like the matchup where they're like not the best. So I boarded out 2 Hask, 2 Lompike, and I drew my only Lompike, but I didn't ramp, so I was on 4 resources, and I was able to ECL him in and defeat like a Bazine, claim top target bounty, and like just kind of stabilize the board off that. And like I've had matches against Sabine too, where like I don't draw a ramp, and they feel like they're safe because they are expecting Hask, and you can just like ECL Lompike into K2 or flip Qi'Ra ECL Lompike, and like they're not kind of expecting that. He's an all-star.
Yeah. Cool. So we kind of that's like the core of the ECL deck, right? Is those 3 cards, because in the 30, those are the ones that, well, the 30 will still play Devastating Gunship, but it usually won't play has
Yeah.
or very many copies of Lone Pike. But
which is sad.
yeah. Yeah. Next up is I want to ask you about the 2-drops. First of all, this list only has 10. I think 10 and 11 is usually around the range, but how do you feel about them as like a package? Because these numbers vary sometimes. Some people prefer 3 Inferno, 4, maybe cut a Pershing, the Hylo Bonds. People are, not everyone's like high on that card. I've actually thought about going up to 3 on it just because of how smooth it fits into curves sometimes, and like the fact that Vader can pull it out with another unit has been very powerful. But how do you feel about the package in general? Are there any others you'd consider even?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've talked about some other 2-drops, and I've tested maybe a couple of them, like the 3-2 guy from set 3, yeah, I've like tested him and a couple other ones, but honestly, I feel like the 4 here are just like the best. I could just go down the list. So Hylabon is like, yeah, he's just amazing. Like playing him when you don't have initiative, because you're giving up initiative to shield him anyway, like just feels really good. He's just so good for like giving you ground presence. The breakpoint with him that is good is like, if you need to, you can barrage off him for 5, and there's like a lot of X5 units in the game that are extremely strong and annoying, cough, cough, tech, DJ, blah, blah. So like, he's just really good. And then he's, 5 power, which can, threaten to take something out. The shield is really annoying for a lot of decks to deal with. Like you mentioned, it's really, impactful when you can, Vader and pull out, like you said, Pike Sentinel Hylabon or Inferno 4 and Hylabon, and like you just, played 3 units with 1 action, which is just like amazing. And then you can then shield him, and then he's just a menace, even in the mid game, kind of just like doing 3 damage or hitting things or whatever. He's really, really good. I have considered going up to 3 of him. Inferno 4 is one of my favorite cards. Unfortunately, it's probably like at its weakest right now in the meta, because like in set 2 it was like Boba Green was everywhere and Boba Yellow, and like it was amazing in that matchup into like Phantom, but like now there's not, like Phantom Django, is right. Yeah, Phantom is not like that sort of ubiquitous card in the meta. So yeah, going down to 2 felt weird, but it's like if you're kind of are objectively looking at it, you're like, it's really not like that much of a powerhouse in this current meta. But it's still like good. It's nice to have, a space unit. The digging for cards is incredible.
Yeah, the issue is that it doesn't really kill anything, right? It's 2 actions, except the Phantom. That's like the only card that you're like getting a value trade off of it.
Yeah, it's nice because you can still put a shield on it in certain situations. Like you can still like poke and race with it, or just action churn. I mean, it's still like a really solid in these colors. It's it's probably
still in the deck for sure. It's just
Yeah, and then Pershing is just like incredible. I mean, this is a card that like when he first came out, I was just like, why do I want to run a 0/5? Like, I don't, you don't often have a lot of action economy to just sit there and like, do nothing, right? Like, I'm just going to draw a card. And I was just really not that excited about him for a long time. And then finally, testing him like in the deck, like he's just really, really, really good. In the finals this last weekend, like he drew me like 4 cards, like, and you don't get to draw with him every turn necessarily. Like obviously there's a lot of situations where you need to claim, like you shouldn't be drawing cards if you're throwing initiative in a lot of cases, but like the card, like 1 extra card can matter a lot of the time. Or sometimes you put him down and like certain players, that I played against, like want to get rid of him immediately. And so you're like, all right, I draw 2 cards and he saves me 3 life basically, or 4 life from you attacking him. And that also feels like really good. And even like playing him on like your 6 resource turn is often like the weakest turn, like in a lot of situations. So like, like playing him in long pike or him in ramp or whatever is like fine. And they have a tough choice. You're basically giving your opponent a difficult choice of like, do I waste time killing a 0/5, or do I let you draw into, Avenger or Maul or whatever? So it kind of makes the board state a little bit awkward for like your opponent.
Yep.
And then the last one, Pike Sentinel, absolute all-star as well. Like just, I mean, won me games last week in Top Cut, won me games this week in Top Cut. Even against Django, like you think of that deck as like, oh, this is all space. Like it's still just really annoying for them to deal with, and he's cheap, and you can just squeeze him in. With Long Pike, I was able to set up like the lock combo where you can like put him down. If you attack with Long Pike, you shield, something in space or whatever, or even a ground unit, and then you shield your Pike Sentinel, and then it's just like really obnoxious for them to deal with it. So yeah, he's been great as well.
And you can build your own village protectors with him and Qi'Ra, right? For 3 resources, you essentially get a village protectors. It's just less action efficient, but the card comes out of 8 or 2. It's a cheap Sentinel.
It's really good.
I would not touch Pike and Pershing. Like those are 3s, and that's never changing. I am considering, like you said, an extra Hylabon. It's just performed very well right now. But where that trim comes from, I mean, there's just a lot of good cards in the deck, so you have to figure that out. Another one I want to ask you about, Super Laser Blast. Until very recently, I was not playing this card at all in the main deck. How has it felt kind of getting this back in here? Is there any matchups in particular that you felt like at least having one in the main? There's one in the side here as well, but overall, like its function.
Yeah, so the current configuration of one main deck, one side, like that's basically, I think, how I had it for like all set 2. And that was obviously a very different meta, but that felt kind of necessary. At the start of this set, I felt like it was just like so fast with just like Django and Sabine and Han Yellow and even Quinlan. Like into those matchups, it's not great. I don't really play it that often. It's not very exciting. So I think it got trimmed a bit, but now with like Han Green, but also some of these other hero decks, like Anakin Blue, I think is a good deck. I mean, we've seen people like pilot it well and like beat other top decks, and like I think it's like his leader deploy is really powerful, so that deck has a lot of like interesting plays they can do. It's good into that. I mean, trying to beat Anakin with a lightsaber is just a lot of decks can't deal with that. And like Super Laser Blast, is just like an out to a lot of these hero, mid-range decks. Like in the event this week, and like I said, in round 2, I played that Boba yellow player, and like he just won game 1. Like even though it's like I consider like to be favor of that matchup because like they can still just curve out and play bombs and blow you up. And Super Laser Blast is the one card where if you're behind, it's the only card that can kind of bail you out in a lot of situations. And like there's a lot of times where you're equal on board state or ahead, and like you just end up resourcing it, and that's fine. But like the situations where like your opponent's pressing you and trying to go wide to dodge Power of the Dark Side and Avenger, which is the correct thing they should be doing most of the time, like Super Laser Blast can just kind of win you the game almost.
The great equalizer, right? And actually, you mentioned you don't usually play it against Mono Yellow Han, but it actually won me a game against Mono Yellow Han at the PQ I was at, and I had to kill 4 of my own units and two of his. I 5 for 2'd, but it like saved me that turn, and I actually won that game. And nice. And it's nice to have this as like you sit and you see Palpatine in front of you, and you're like, you can win. If you like, this card is in your deck, maybe you'll draw it. Like, I think maybe it gives you a little bit of like that sense of security and some maybe fringe matchups, right? Things that it's difficult for us to jam a deck that will like be to alter this deck in such a way that will be good into Palpatine, especially like blue and yellow. We can't spend that much space, but hey, we've got this one of that can be our backup plan there.
And actually I played a Palp Blue 3 weeks ago at the games and stuff, and I sat down across from him, and I was like, all right, this is just going to be a loss, like whatever. And I actually won that matchup, and I didn't even have Super Laser Blast. I don't know how I won that, but like in that matchup, I feel like it's their leader's so good that they're almost like priced into the board more. So like their Super Laser Blast is like bad. Like they don't want to flip Palp and then Super Laser Blast, whereas like you're much less committed to the board, so your blast is like way better than theirs in that matchup too.
Yeah, and like you're playing similar top end, so it's all about finding a way to equalize the value that Palp generates, which is difficult, but like that's probably the cleanest way to do it is like they flip, you wipe, and then it doesn't even matter if they play something that turn, because now we're kind of like, you kind of prefer to be the second person to play the big thing anyway. Right. Like, and I find that pretty good. Let me ask you, Ramp. There's 6 of them. Would you ever trim either of these cards?
No.
Okay.
No.
We can skip that part. And yes, and the 8 drops, I guess, like, do you have any like specifics? So I'll ask you about Snoke, because this is one I actually don't love him in most matchups, but he does serve a pretty vital role in one specific matchup, and it is a matchup that I believe you had to play a bunch. But tell me about your experience running this guy.
Yeah, so like in set 2, he was just like, bananas because everyone was playing Boba, right? So it's like they're 7th Fleet defenders, they're Phantoms. Like he was just very, very good as an out. He's been, a little bit like not as good in the beginning of this set, but he's a very unique card in a sense that, like, many times when I play him, like my opponent just looks like disgusted. That's how I can describe it. Or I've had opponents describe him to me as like he's the most oppressive card to play against because it just messes like with a lot of their math and sequencing. Like as one example, I'll give an example like Han Green, right? A matchup where he's not very good at all usually, right? He can get waylaid. He doesn't typically have a lot of immediate impact, but it does kind of like throw a wrench into some of their sequencing, like Enfys Nest, for example, right? Incredibly good card. There's a lot of situations where they can smuggle out a blaster, attack with Enfys, bounce your walker, bounce whatever, right? But like Snoke like blocks that, right? So like there's just a lot of matchups where it's like he doesn't like immediately like win you the game, so to speak, but it's like sort of like having to play around him, and in certain specific board states, he's very difficult to deal with and very annoying. So I do think he's like very good to still have. And then in the Django matchup, that's kind of like Boba from last set. He is like very, very good.
It's like
very
the primary win con, right? Like sticking Snoke. And another matchup that I felt like the new boss Green, for instance, the 30 health, like this deck is kind of reminiscent of like Vader,
very much Vader,
Green, and like maybe even like mono green Palp, any of the Palps or any of these big villain decks that don't play blue, right? They have a really difficult time beating things that have shields on them. And if you get a Snoke out there with a shield, right? All the removal is like damage based. It's like barrage, and this guy makes their barrages way worse. And then also like, of course, they can just never kill him if he has a shield on it. So he does come up a little bit for me in some of those.
Yeah, because they want to go like barrage, or they want to play Palpatine unit, or they want a Devastator. And Snoke, like, with the shield is really hard for them to deal with. And you can sequence it such that, like, it's kind of telegraphed if they want to like force choke your Snoke or open fire, right? It's like they have to like daring raid, or not daring raid in that matchup, but like whatever, like some damage, and then you can shield them again usually, and it wastes a lot of their time. The other thing with Snoke is like the breakpoints like change with like a rolling barrage. I feel like there's a lot of like boards or they go in space, I guess is a really good example. Like Home 1, they have this massive space board. If you have Snoke in play, you can barrage off of him to kind of like really stabilize the board, and like kind of, whereas like barraging off of another unit wouldn't be as impactful, I guess.
Yeah. All right. One more question here. So there's no takedown in this deck. That's a card that floats around in these decks. Has certainly been more of a staple in the past. Do you feel fine with that? Is that a card you miss at all?
I think it was a little bit better last set. It did feel a little better, but I think continuously playing it, like you and I have discussed, like you're often trading down. It doesn't feel very good to just sit there and like pass with takedowns. Like I don't like that play pattern very much. And it's very good against Falcon, which is in the meta right now. In theory, it should be very good. But I don't know. Like we've discussed, like you'd rather have units on the board, and like Sabine Flip, for example, like watching PQ streams, I almost feel bad for like some of the hero blue decks, because it's like that's like kind of the only option they have in a lot of these board states, where they just have to sit there and kind of pass and then take down the unit. And it's like your opponent has so much control over the tempo and the flow of the turn, and they can like choose to claim, and that just feels kind of like you're on the back foot, and it's not as like proactive, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. All right. I want to talk a little bit about 3 specific matches. Well, one of them is kind of a 2-parter, the Han, because it's kind of 2 decks now. But overall, let's start with Mono Yellow Han. It is probably the most played, or yeah, I'd still say it's probably the most played and most consistent deck. Do you feel good about this matchup?
I do. And yeah, I mean, and that might sound crazy to some people that haven't played this specific matchup or aren't familiar with the villain blue green, but so yeah, I would say Han Yellow I think is the best overall deck. I mean, you can look at the PQ performances, like talk to the top players. I mean, DJ Han is the most broken interaction of the game right now. Like that's not really I don't think anyone would debate that. It's a really 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 good deck. I think that there's nothing like specifically that like Qi'Ra does like as a shell that we're like targeting Han. It's just the cards that are played, I feel like, line up really badly for Han. Like Vader obviously is like the number one example, right? So it's like, they're trying to tempo you out and, bounce your stuff. And, they have incredible cards like, Cantina Bouncer and all these like really, really strong tempo cards that still represent threats and stuff. And so like, if you can get to Vader though, it's like you can Vader and then get 1 or 2 units, Vader ambushes, take something out, and then you just have the board's just a mess. And it's just all this stuff everywhere. And then also that's one action that you can claim. So he like does 8 actions at once and he helps you get initiative. And their preferred way of, dealing with things is bounce. And if you bounce Vader, like that does not feel good. No. You can just replay him. So like I think a lot of the individual cards like Vader, Maul, are just kind of difficult for them to like tempo around, I guess.
And my teammate Alex, who's won like 3 PQs with this deck, he will tell you the number 1 card against Han Yellow is Darth Vader. It is a complete tempo steal off of them while deploying multiple units to the board, and Han does not like seeing multiple units in play. They are trying to keep the board condensed as much as possible. And he will tell you the second card he's scared of the most is Dr. Pershing. And Dr. Pershing on turn 1 is a beating for them because they have to like spend a lot of time dealing with it because they can't let you just draw 4 cards. It's just not acceptable for them. So those 2 are probably huge. And then, of course, ECL is kind of built-in insulation from Tech DJ in a lot of ways. Not even Tech DJ. I'll just say DJ. Like, Tech is ancillary. Very few Mono Yellow Hans will ever try to pull off the Tech stuff against a Qi'Ra deck.
I've seen it. I've seen a decent amount.
Yeah, they try. Well, it doesn't usually work against Qi'Ra. Yeah. You also have, like, the leader, right? The thing that separates, I think, Qi'Ra and Krennic a little bit is the fact that she is basically another free removal into this deck, where Krennic does not help block that flip turn, right? So, and what do you think about like the ramp dynamic? Like that for me has felt very important. Getting the ramp. Yeah. Is there anything? How do you feel like the texture of this matchup changes if you do not ramp on turn 2?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like I literally just am hard mulliganing for ramp. Even if Pershing's in the hand, I may or may not keep it. I remember one game against Alex, who just mentioned a couple weeks ago, he sparked me and the hand I kept was Pershing, Super Laser Technician, Resupply, Scanning Officer. It's just like,
yeah, that doesn't even matter what the last 2 cards were.
But yeah, I just feel like in that matchup, obviously we talked about Vader and whatever, but it's just like, it's almost like none of the cards matter. The way I feel about that matchup is it's like, it feels a little bit like Sabine in a sense that it's like so tightly condensed into like the first like 4 turns. And
in a lot of ways, yeah. They grind pretty well sometimes, but yes, mostly it's that flip turn, right?
Yeah, they can just blow you out and kind of take over the game. So it's like, you really have to navigate the beginning of the game like really well. And that to me is like ramp is the most important thing. Next thing is like getting bored. Like there were games that I won where the games I didn't ramp and won were either having Pershing or Hylaban, honestly. Like Hylaban is really annoying for them to deal with just because he's shielded. And like I mentioned earlier, he's got that breakpoint of 5. So if you OB off of him, take out, a 5 health unit, and then he's just sitting there. And it's like, they want to like smuggle tech out, but like they can't. And then you've already spent your resources. So like if they pass, you can just claim. It just makes the board stay like really awkward. But yeah, if you don't ramp, you're behind, I would say. Yep. I wouldn't I don't think it's unlosable. There are outs, like, if you can trade down, they flip Han, you still have like perilous position, you still have power of the dark side. In the excuse me, 2 weeks ago against my teammate, uh, the one turn I thought he was going to try to tech DJ me. I don't know if he had it or not. I think I forgot to ask him, but basically I just made the decision of like, I had a resupply in hand and I was on 6 resources. I was like, I'm not going to try to like play around this or bluff my way around this because I couldn't deal with it. So I was like, I'm just going to double ramp. And I double ramped. And at that point, if they want to DJ you, then I think you feel okay about
Because
that.
you're still going to be able to play Vader the next turn. And like,
Yeah,
you can come back from a resource steal because of Vader, particularly.
right. And because like if they're DJing on 7 as opposed to like Han unit or something or Zori or Big Falcon, like you're on less of a clock and you have more time to find answers.
And you mentioned Hylabon. Another thing I like about that card on turn 1 is that it can kill Bodhi. And like, it kind
Yes.
of disincentivizes them a little bit from trying to Bodhi you. So,
Yeah.
on the topic of Bodhi, though, is there any, like, how do you manage your turn 1 resourcing decision knowing that they could Bodhi you on turn 1? Some hands, maybe it's easy. You have like 2 super laser techs. You're just gonna bin the resupply, right? Like you're not gonna let it happen. But are there any like any tips that you have for like maybe managing the fact that they have Bodhi, they could do it turn 1?
Yeah, I think it really depends on your hand, I feel like, and maybe if they have initiative or not. Like for example, I can think of some games where, I had initiative and like I had let's say Inferno 4 resupply, and I don't really care that much about playing Inferno 4 on turn 1, so like I will just claim and resupply, and if they want to spark turn 1, then I feel happy about that because like they're not playing a unit. Or I can just play Inferno 4, and they're going to play Crafty Smuggler or something and then claim the resupply. So in that situation it's fine. If not, if you're on the back foot and you don't have initiative, you have to think about claiming so you can then resupply. Like I think it really depends on your hand. If you have like power and resupply, you feel a little bit better because you can deal with it. Obviously, like Pershing and Super Laser Technician are like just the best because they can't immediately answer those. But I think, trying to find ramp obviously, and then I'm trying to think of what other units are really good in that matchup. I mean, Lom Pike, like honestly, in that matchup too, like I think the one thing to point out that's really important is like there's a lot of sequences where like playing Lom Pike like without ECLing first, and then they bounce him and they ECL him the second time. Like that actually can matter a lot, and that's actually like kind of turned around some of the matches where I haven't ramped because like they still have to like deal with him at that point, and they waste like if they waylay your unit, like you feel okay about that, and then you can ECL it like if you still have ECL.
Yeah, nice. All right. We did spend a bit on the Han Green already, but is there anything like? Do you feel like it's easier or harder in general?
I feel like it's so I would say it's harder in a sense that the matches go longer on average. There's more decisions to make and there's more lines to be aware of. And if you don't have a lot of practice into that matchup, like, and you're playing against a good Han Green player, like they're going to eat your lunch. And fortunately, I have played against one of my teammates, Sunny, like since set 1, like he's been on Han Green, not the whole time, but like many top cut matches, like I've played against him in Han Green. And so I've gotten a ton of practice into it, but the sequencing is very different than I think the mistake I made maybe like in a second PK was like I was blurring the lines a little bit between like how I play against Han Yellow versus Han Green because I hadn't played against Han Green in a bit, and they are very different. Like Han Green just has like even bigger power plays because like they can burst out to 8 with home 1. They have like the double Marauder play I mentioned. Like they have Enfys with the blaster. They have Ewing into Luke. They have Ewing into Cad Bane. Like these are plays that if you aren't playing around them, if you're not aware of them, can just like win the game on the spot.
Yep.
So I think practicing that and like being aware of it and just getting reps in, because like the longer matches, I feel like you're more prone to make one misplay at some point. So you really have to have the sequencing down and like around their flip turn. What are you gonna do in their flip turn, and how do you kind of approach that?
Cool. And yeah, so the last two I wanted to touch, and again, some of this gels with some of the card discussion we've already done, but like Sabine. So let me ask you this. Turn 1 A-Wing, do you claim Power of the Dark Side?
I think it really depends.
Saying we don't have takedown in this deck, right? So we are soft to the wing leader play, right? So
yeah. Honestly, I think I did that more in like set 2. I think I'm less likely to do that right now, depending on what I have. Like if I can start with like a Hylabon, I might just do that, honestly. But yeah, like you said, you have to be thinking about how do you deal with wing leader. So it's like, do you have barrage? Do you have gunship? Gunship is like just a 1 card answers it, which feels really good. Obviously barrage can as well. But yeah, I mean, if I have like a weaker hand, and maybe I have like Inferno 4, I have no turn 1 play, then absolutely, like claim power is totally fine.
Yeah, and the issue, of course, is it's almost impossible to win if that A-Wing hits you twice, right? If it hits you for 10, it's a problem. You can take the 5, but for it to not hit you for 10, it means you basically have to resupply on turn 2 and then immediately answer it, right? Super Laser Tag won't do the job because it takes another action to get the ram.
Right. That's one thing to point out too. Just not just this matchup, but any matchup lately, like the Purging into Technician combo has just been like really, really good. Like you said, it's action economy, right? That 1 extra action makes a huge difference. So it's not even like drawing the card. I don't even really care about that. It's like if they go space, like how you can pop your Technician with Qi'Ra, but you can't afford to spend that resource. Whereas Pershing does it in 1 action, gets you the resource and draws you the card. So yeah, that's also a really good combo to like look for.
And then is anything you would like to say about navigating the flip turn? Well, the Sabine flip turn, which often will be our flip turn because we are trying to ramp, but navigating like their wing leader / Darksaber play onto Sabine leader. Is there anything you want to like mention about how you try to like sequence around that turn?
Yeah, so it really depends on like what's in your hand, right? Like, do you have barrage? Do you have Gideon Hask? Do you have a gunship or whatever? But ultimately, like if my the way I describe it is like you're attacking each other or whatever, and then what do they do next? And often, if my opponent goes, "Oh, I Sabine ping you in the middle of the turn," you're like, "All right, this feels like Darksaber. Like, what's going on here?" If they Sabine ping and then flip Sabine without spending any resources, you're like, "All right, this is." Basically the 3 cards that you're looking for: Wing Leader, Darksaber, or General's Blade, right? And from Qi'Ra's perspective, like it doesn't really matter which one they play. And what I mean is like from the Sabine health, which I know but I'll just explain it. Is like, so you basically want to ideally spend your resources or pass until they equip Sabine, and then she's going to smack you in the face unless you have a Pike Sentinel. And then you can flip Qi'Ra, and all 3 of those upgrades will, once Qi'Ra flips, will drop her to a breakpoint of 4 health, and then Kira's there, and oftentimes I will just claim, because the best play is if you have barrage, or you have the chance to draw barrage off your 2 cards next turn, you can barrage Sabine and maybe even Wing Leader or whatever else is hanging around. Kira's a 6/6. They don't get the Sabine ping that turn, saves you a health, and they can't ECL Poe in. I mean, they can, but like then Qi'Ra will trade. Yeah, and you're very happy with that. So that's kind of like the line that you want to take against Sabine. And like, it's not getting fun getting smacked in the face for 7 with the Darksaber, but like that's the good thing about that is like other decks have to be like, well, if I draw Confiscate, or if I draw Fang Fighters or whatever to deal with the the General's Blade or the Darksaber, like the nice thing is Qi'Ra, like it's the leader, so like you don't have to draw a specific card, like you always have the answer to her.
Yeah, and yeah, you basically described that perfectly. It's and I like that you mentioned like claim, because you can always still attack her next turn if you need to, but this gives you more information, right? It's because if you just trade and they claim, well, you're basically in the exact same position if you had claimed and attacked. Like initiative is back on them regardless, right? So, yeah, and other than that, we know kind of what carries the rest of this deck is Poe Wrecker. do you have any specific things about how to mitigate potentially? Well, you mentioned how to mitigate the Poe value a little bit, but the Wrecker.
I think the important thing in these aggro matchups, I mean, you could say it's for every matchup, but in specifically these matchups where like the games are typically shorter, like Django Sabine, right, is like, I sometimes will get stuck in this like damage prevention. Like I need to save health, which is like what you need to be doing, but you also need to be like closing out the game. And the way that you kind of described this to me and got me to like rethink this is like, well, if you want to save health, then kill them and they can't draw cards. They can't hurt you anymore. And like really thinking about like, oh, like can I attack with this Hylaban, or like do I want to hold it if they want to play a Marine? So thinking about what turn they're on, like worst case scenario, I guess. So like turn 5, like you got to be thinking about Poe, right? And if they don't play Poe, they play something else, then like you're probably like okay with that. Turn 6, do they have ECL? Then you're going to get record. So like, how does your ground state look like? Can you get a Pike Sentinel with a shield out after they claim, going into the 6 resource turn? So they have to, hit the record to pop the shield and then smash into it and they only take 4 damage or whatever. How can you survive record, wrecking you basically? And game one game one is just super draw dependent. I feel like, if they draw all their 4 causes and you don't draw vigilance, then you can just lose, and that's fine. But going into post board, I feel like top targets and vigilance are like super, especially just top target, right? Like you can be able to squeeze in top target at any point on something, and they have a lot of unique units. For 1 is like just really really impactful, because that kind of undoes like a 4 cause the way I think about it. They're spending 3 resources, you're spending 1. And it just gives you more time. So, trying to mitigate damage and then just looking for that. I think the other thing I'll point out is like, late game, let's say you have like a gunship or something in space. Think about like, well, did they play a lot of ground units this game? Like, do I need to attack with this or do something else in case they play red leader red 3 or some other space unit? So, like if you do you have all ground units in your hand and maybe like no barrage or something, and then it's like, well, you want to maybe play a space unit or leave your space unit ready so it can like, you don't want to take like 3 damage randomly and then be in 4 cause range.
Yep. All right, cool. And the last big matchup, these are the big 3, I would say, is Django. And we talked again a bit about this in your final stuff. Not a matchup we love to see, not an impossible one though. What would you say is like the most important card or cards to look for?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like you touched on Snoke earlier. I do feel like it's Snoke and Walker mainly. The one line I was able to take in a couple of the Django games was like double ramping. You're boarding out like your Lon Pikes and Gideons usually, which feels weird, but like, ambushing Gideon Hask into a Greedo and then they Tarkin Town your Gideon Hask does not feel very good. It just doesn't really do very much. So like trying to find something else to do on that turn, even Pike Sentinel actually. Pike Sentinel was like really relevant in a lot of those games, because like game 1 they're going to have on the doorstep, at least game 1 I assume. John said he boarded them out, like games 2 and 3, which makes sense. Or like Django still has to attack on the ground.
Right, they're mostly hitting you for 3 at a time, and whether it's the ground or the space, it doesn't really matter. So
right. So like Pike Sentinel is surprisingly like, I would say don't just like auto resource him because he's a ground unit or whatever. He's really good. I mean, obviously, you're looking for a barrage. I think game 3 of the finals, John triple dark rated into a fire spray. So he had like a P38 and a fire spray. And I fortunately like had a barrage and the board state was such that I was able to like deploy Qi'Ra, barrage, clear space out, and then deal some damage to Django and then like, be able to attack Django next turn. So like, can you sequence, a barrage to get like max value? Ruthless Raider is just a huge pain, obviously. The hard thing for me is like a lot of the time if they go like double Raider, like you just have to not kill them. Like you have to leave the Raiders alive, which is really obnoxious, and it's like
only possible with Snoke. Like,
Yeah, exactly. Right. If you draw, yeah, sorry, that's what I should set that up. Like, if you have Snoke and they have like your out is like leaving the Ruthless Raiders alive, which means like there's things that I can sequence better in this matchup. Like, honestly, it's like probably resourcing Power of the Dark Side at that point. Like once they have two Ruthless Raiders, like you have Snoke down and that's your game plan. Like, and you're like perilous position on one of the Raiders or whatever. It's like you're not going to play Power of the Dark Side, which feels weird, but like you're trying to just beat them down with Snoke at that point. So trying to like sequence around that, or like having a gunship and then shielding the gunship and just going face, like don't even bother attacking their units and just try to like race them down, and then just using like your vigilance and your top targets to like try to keep you alive to just attack them. And like the shields, similar to Bosk, I would say is like a big deal in that matchup. Shielding your gunship, shielding your Snoke.
Exhaust your units.
Right, yeah, because it's all, and I guess I think they have like no good to me dead maybe, but like trying to just play out multiple units, shielding them when possible. Walker's a really good unit in that matchup. But yeah, I mean, draw well, I guess. I think it's similar to Sabine. It feels a little bit better post board, right? You have just like you have a little bit more of a margin for error with the healing compared to game one, like where it just feels like a little bit harder.
Yeah. Ruthless Raider's probably the absolute best card against this deck, regardless of what deck is playing it.
Yes, it's a very good card.
I think like the games where they just get too many of them, those are very difficult. And like they have the lurking TIE Phantom, and I know we have answers, but you don't always have it, and then like that can get you, right? Power of the Dark Side being one of the best removal cards in the deck, maybe at its weakest against this deck, where they play like ISB agents or lurking TIE Phantoms or Ruthless Raiders, where it's like, where does this fit in? And then like Vader and Maul, like I resource those cards all the time against Jenga, and they're the best cards against basically every other deck except Sabine. So yeah, it's a weird matchup. It's
to touch on what you just said actually, about like the Bazines and the ISBs and all Greedo and all these little tiny ground units, like trying to like keep the board as clean as possible. Like I had to in the one game in the finals, I had to like attack ISB with Qi'Ra or something to like get rid of that in case I wanted to power in the future, but also to like if you can do it with Qi'Ra specifically, like you can buffer power a little bit, which could be a bigger barrage. So I think trying to manage the ground. Gunship also was really, really good in the matchup, specifically for Phantom. So like if you don't draw Perilous, or if you're not on Snoke yet, like I think games 1 and 2 in the finals, I was able to ECL Gunship, ambush the Phantom, and then defeat the Kylo's TIE Silencer with the Gwenplate. And like it immediately gets Tarkin Town, but like you've like stabilized for like a turn, and that feels like pretty good.
And if you could make them use the Tarkin Town early, maybe with like if you have Hylabon and they have a ground opener or a Pike Sentinel and like they need to get it out, then that gunship all of a sudden can pose an actual threat to them, which is really nice.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. So I got just real short here for you. I know it's been a while. This is looking forward. This is just for fun. Is there anything you're hoping, like, nothing that has been released yet, but is there anything that would excite you if you saw it, like an idea for a card that might like be cool for this archetype?
Yeah, for this archetype, I mean, kind of like what we were talking about earlier of just like your 6 resource turn can feel kind of lackluster a lot of the times. It's like your 5 resource turn is like Lompike or Hask or whatever after you've ramped, and that feels really good. And then you get to 6 and you're like, I don't really know what I'm doing this turn sometimes. Like, you could maybe play like some small guys or whatever, but having like a 6 drop that we could ECL would be great. Like some bomb, like, something equivalent. Yeah, just heals you a bunch. Or something like, how Hero has like General Riken, maybe something like that. I don't know. As for 6, especially, I guess, in this set, it would maybe be in space, because it seems very like space focused. That would be really sweet. I think that's like the main thing. Otherwise, it's the other slots in the curve are like pretty good.
And I mean, this is kind of goes hand in hand, but is there anything you're hoping for set 4? Maybe not Qi'Ra related, just like anything.
I think the 2 things that pop out to me right now that look fun are the new Thrawn and Phasma. Because like I mentioned earlier in set one, I was on Tarkin Red, which sounds very random, but like, this would be like those same colors. And with Phasma, you could run ECL, and I think her new unit's like a 5-drop. So like, a villain aggro, which we don't really have right now, I guess, aside from Django. But that would be really fun, I think, if that's like a viable archetype.
Nice. And I guess any hopes that you have for your own personal competition, like what are you trying to compete in? Yeah.
I got the buy to worlds now. They won the PQ,
So
so
going
very
into that
excited.
for sure.
Yeah,
You think you'll try
very
to get
excited
to
for
like the
that.
sectionals and regionals? I think we'll get some news about that soon.
Yeah, I mean, when they get announced, like, if depending on where they fall and how far away they are, I would maybe try to go to one of them for sure. And then it'll be nice to kind of take a little break from PQs because I've been doing too many of them lately. But like in set four, like it seems like a lot of the PQs like sold out. It did really well. People had a good time. So I imagine there'll be a bunch more. So we definitely look forward to some PQs in set four.
All right. Awesome. So yeah, thanks so much for joining. This was pretty cool. It's again, congrats on the recent
Thanks.
performances. It's a wild run. And yeah, for everyone watching, thank you for joining. This is Andrew, big time winner now. And yeah, until next time, take care, guys.
Thanks, Will.